Hello and welcome to episode 455 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, we're back. How you doing?
I'm good, and I suppose we should just say straight off the bat that there is no video version of the podcast this week. We've started video in the podcast, and it has nothing to do with the fact that I've got the unsightly cold sore and Andy accidentally shaved his beard off this week, which I'm still laughing about. But how did you do it, Andy?
It's a very long story, but essentially a lack of concentration, switching up the accessories on the beard trimmer, and forgot that I'd taken off the main beard trimmer accessory before absolutely piling into my beard and realising that there was no going back. So I had to take the whole thing off.
But luckily for Andy, he's blessed in the beard growing department. So by the time this podcast goes out, Andy will probably have a full beard grown back. It would take me months to grow a beard like that. So yeah, all good this week, Andy. We've just finished the tax year. A bit of admin for people. Don't forget that now the tax year has passed, so we're into the new tax year, then you can, of course, use your allowances like your ISA allowance. So there is something to be said for if you've got the money and you want to use your allowance, why bother waiting? You could actually use your allowance now. And if you're using a flexible ISA, which means you can withdraw the money out if you needed to and then put it back in and it not impact your overall ISA allowance, then that is something to think about. And of course, the new ISA rules have come in, which means you can now open up more than one of the same type of ISA and contribute to it in this tax year.
Okay, so before we get on to what we've got coming up in this week's show, when we were discussing what we were going to cover, there was lots of stuff because we've written lots of articles as we do each week. Anyway, so what we thought we'd do is mention what we've written about this week and explain how and where you can read those articles.
So some of those do occasionally make it onto the podcast, but not all of them will do. So don't forget that every week we send out a newsletter on Sunday. It is sent at 10 a.m. every week, which includes all the big news stories out there in relation to money on the internet. So that's from all the different newspapers, for example, but principally the news stories and articles that we publish each week. And like I say, many of them don't make it onto the podcast. And also it contains the new videos that we do. So make sure that you do sign up to our newsletter. You can find it at moneytothemasses.com/newsletter. We'll put a link in the notes so you can sign up. So if you do that, you'll receive the newsletter every week. And it also includes a roundup of the money sections that you get on the weekend. So most national newspapers have a specific money section and a property section. And we do a roundup of those as well in the newsletter each week, as well as a small intro from me, which usually picks out something that is important for people to either read or do that particular week.
And just to give you a sneak peek on a few of the articles that feature in the newsletter this week, Joel's written a brilliant article about passports. There's some interesting information that you may need to know if you're travelling later on this year. There's a new 99% mortgage that's quite interesting. Harvey's written about that one. And we also do a quick roundup of all the bills that are going up from April. So that's interesting. And actually it means that some people aren't necessarily that worse off because there's a couple of things that are also coming down. Moving on though, Damon, what have we got coming up on this week's show?
So on this week's show, we're going to do usual three pieces. The NS&I British Savings Bonds have been released this week. So it was a big part of the spring budget. It was an announcement that not only were we going to get this British ISA potentially at some point in the future, but they were obviously going to launch a British Savings Bond. So that has now been launched this week by NS&I. So I'm going to talk to you about it. What is it? What sort of rate can you get? How does it work? And actually, how does it compare to the rest of the savings market? I'll close out the show with a short piece on a type of budgeting that has taken social media by storm. So the likes of TikTok, and Andy is going to do a piece on childcare.
Yeah, the 1st of April is a key date in terms of free childcare because it means that parents of 2-year-olds can now access up to 15 hours of free childcare. So I'll explain how that works, but also there's some key information in there and dates as well because it's a staggered rollout. It means essentially by 2025, parents of 9 months old can access up to 30 hours of free childcare.
And don't just switch off if you don't have children. This is important for people who may be planning to have children in the future, as well as people, maybe you know somebody, whether it's a family member, perhaps a child who's having their own children, and they might not realise the rules, but in particular how they are applied, because as much as the headline numbers state there will be 15 hours of free childcare, the reality is that many people won't actually get that from their childcare provider because of the way they run their businesses. So that's something that's worth listening out for.
Okay, so let's start with the launch of the NS&I British Savings Bonds this week.
So the bonds were launched this week, as you say, Andy, and there was quite a bit of news around it because people had been waiting to see what this new product would be as it was promised in the spring budget. Now, the bonds are provided by National Savings and Investments, so NS&I, and you can buy them via their website. That's how you open them, buy the bonds, and actually manage the accounts. So to give you the key features of these new bonds, you have to be 16 years or older to buy one. They come in increments of £500. So the minimum amount you can have to put into a British savings bond is £500, but you can have up to £1 million in British savings bonds. So that is attractive in one way because obviously you don't have the financial services compensation scheme with NS&I products because they are 100% backed by government. So that is something that is of benefit. Don't forget that if you put your money in a bank or building society and it's covered by the financial services compensation scheme, then for each person and per banking license, you will be covered up to £85,000 should the institution go bust. So the benefit with NS&I, there is 100% backing by the government up to £1 million. Now, there are technically two different types of this bond that have been introduced. There is a guaranteed income bond and there's a guaranteed growth bond. And the difference really is that the income bond actually pays the income, the interest out in monthly installments, whereas the growth bond, it's all rolled up until the end when the bond matures. And that maturity is after 3 years. So both of these products are 3-year products. If you put your money into them, you can't get the money out for that 3-year period. So what sort of rate is going to be paid on these bonds? That is always going to be the key thing. So it's 4.15% AER. Now, if you do decide to put money into a British savings bond and let's say they are still available next year, then the way it works is that if you have £1,000 worth of the British savings bonds, then if you want to put more money in next year, if they were still around and they haven't been all taken up, then what you would do is you'd actually take out a new one. So there would be a maturity date from that point on the new instalment of money of another 3 years. So you bear that in mind. You can't just top up your existing British savings bonds. Now, what does actually make them British? When I announced this at the time of the spring budget, I said I'm not really sure what's going to make them British. And after reading all the information out there, I'm still not really sure what makes them British because they support the UK. That is apparently what makes them British. But by that definition, nearly everything that NS&I does supports the UK. So I'm still not 100% clear what really makes it British, but if that's the sort of thing that floats your boat, then these are branded British savings bonds. Now, the one thing to point out, there are the two different types, the income version and the growth version. And as with savings bonds that have a fixed term, if it's a growth version you choose, then the interest is rolled up over time. So at the point of maturity, then the payout that you get, so that interest will be subject to income tax. So that could be a sizable amount. You have to bear that in mind, and that will be taxable in the year that you receive the maturity proceeds. Of course, if you opt for the income version of this particular type of bond, then you get the payments each month, and therefore you'll be taxed in the year that you receive them. So that's something that people may want to bear in mind. But when I look at it, is this actually any good as a product in terms of the rate? Now, on Money to the Masses, we regularly update savings tables. So we look at all the different types of savings accounts out there. So it would be fixed rate bonds, whether it be easy access accounts, whether it be cash ISAs. We update them every week to show you the best rates that are available. So if you compare what are the best rates at the moment in terms of 3-year fixed term, then the market leading rate as I make this podcast is from Skipton Building Society at 4.75%. Now, you do have to have a minimum of £5,000 to open that. And with the other best buys at the moment, which are 4.67% from Zenith and there's 4.66% from Oxbury, these things do change all the time. They have minimum opening balances of £1,000. Now, of course, you may want to look at how these things are run. Some of them you can only apply via branches or via post, unlike the NS&I products, which you can manage and take out online. And of course, don't forget they will be only protected by the FSCS up to that £85,000 limit that I mentioned. So the rates you can get better rates elsewhere within the savings market. So in that regard, I'm not sure these are going to fly off the shelves like hotcakes, as we saw with the 1-year fixed rate bond that NS&I produced earlier last year, which paid a market leading rate and then sold out in a matter of weeks. But there will be some people who may be attracted to them, maybe just for the British branding. I, for one, wouldn't take them out just based upon that. There are far better deals out there. But for people who have large sums of money, then they may be attracted to the fact that you can put up to £1 million in there. Obviously, do bear in mind these are subject to income tax, so you're going to have to factor that in when you're looking at your own tax position. But the other thing I wanted to do is to use this product to give a bit of a wider review of the savings space at the moment, because it has changed significantly over time. So if you go back to the last couple of years, what we saw is that rates were starting to go up in savings products, and we saw the Bank of England base rate going up. And what we were witnessing were the long-term savings bonds having the best interest rate. So the longer you were prepared to lock your money away for, the better the rate of return you got. So the 5-year fixed rate bonds paid better than the 4-year, the 3-year, 2-year, 1-year, all the way down to where you had instant access paying the worst rate of interest. Now that is typical in an environment where people are expecting that rates might go up over time. But even in a ordinary environment, you'd probably expect the rates for the longer term bonds to give you a better rate of return on an annual basis, at least, because you're locking your money away. Now, we are in a strange scenario where the expectation for the Bank of England base rate is for it to be cut because we've hit a peak. That's the consensus view of the market in terms of the base rate. That means savings rates have generally been deemed to have hit their peak. And so when you look at the savings market, now the best rates we are seeing out there at the moment are those on the shorter termed products. So you will see that the best 1-year fixed rate bond that you can get in the market at the moment is paying 5.25%. If you're looking at easy access accounts, you can get 5.06 as the best. Interestingly, if you go and look at cash ISAs, there's a real battleground in cash ISAs at the moment where you can get as much as 5.17%, and that's from Plum as I make this podcast. But this is almost changing on a daily basis as they've been battling to try and secure people's money at the end of the tax year and at the start of the new tax year. So it's very unusual to have cash ISAs paying better rates than you get on ordinary savings accounts, but also better rates than you see on a lot of fixed rate bonds. So these are easy access cash ISA rates. The one thing I will point out, and this is just insight generally, that if they are raising their rates, and we're talking about each day, they're almost raising them by 0.1% just so their marketing can say they are the market leading cash ISA rate. These aren't fixed rates. So there's a very good chance that as we go into the new tax year, you're going to see some of those rates come off and start to be reduced. So you may have taken out the product. You will still probably get a very attractive rate of return, but you can't assume that it's going to be still paying over 5% for an extended period of time, especially if we start seeing the base rate come down from the Bank of England or an expectation of that base rate to start to come down. So the message is at the moment that if you are looking at savings rates and trying to find the best ones out there, locking your money away for longer is not going to get you the best annual rate of return. In the past, we used to use things like cash savings ladders to try and get that perfect combination between flexibility and the best rates by locking your money away. We can put a link to an article where we discuss that, but that isn't relevant anymore because we're now in an environment where actually you're getting better rates of return on shorter termed products and even easy access products. But that does mean that the rate you're going to get is either not secured in an easy access case or in a 1-year fixed rate bond. You're only going to have it fixed for 1 year. There may be still attractions for people wanting to get a better rate or the best rates now for locking away to 3 years. But even if you do, then the British savings bonds aren't the best ones out there. So do shop around. We'll put a link in the show notes for those best buy tables that we publish every week. And again, you'll always find links to these in the newsletter that we send out every Sunday. So we always tend to put links to all of our tables that we update so people can find them and access them when they want to.
Okay, so moving on to the next piece then, and we're going to be talking about free childcare because there was a change from the 1st of April to free childcare and how it works. If we go back a bit and explain what's happened, back in the spring budget in 2023, Jeremy Hunt announced a number of measures that were aimed at helping working parents with the cost of childcare. And the first of those measures is now in place. So it means prior to the latest changes, parents of children aged 3 and 4 could access up to 30 hours of free childcare. And from the 1st of April, working parents with children aged 2 prior to the 1st of April 2024, they can now access 15 hours of free childcare. So that's the first stage of the extension to free childcare. It's come into place a year after the announcements were made in the spring budget of 2023. And so the reason I'm bringing this to the pod is it is a little more complex than this due to the way it's being rolled out, because from September this year, those 15 hours of free childcare will be extended down to children aged just 9 months. So it means that anyone effectively returning straight from maternity leave can access that free childcare straight away. And that's from September.
So we'll put a link in the notes of the podcast so people can go through to read the article, which also links through to a tool on the official Gov website that tells you about eligibility for this free childcare. While most people will get it, there is actually technical eligibility criteria, but presumably people have to apply to get this.
Yes, there are key dates as to when people can apply. And again, I would urge people to go and check out the article that we've done, because we've made it really simple in terms of checking the table, checking the dates of when your children were born, and so you'll know exactly when you can apply for these things. But essentially, how you apply is very, very simple. You go onto the gov.uk website. You'll need to make sure you have a few details to hand, including your national insurance number, the date you started or are due to start work, details of any government support or benefits you already receive, and you also need the birth certificate reference number. Once submitted, it says it can take up to 7 days. That's during very busy times, but most people will get a decision on the same day. One thing to make people aware of, which is a bit of a quirk of the system, is you will be given a reference number ultimately once you've been accepted. And with that reference number, you can use that to apply to your relevant childcare provider to get the free childcare. That reference number only actually lasts 3 months in total before it then expires. But due to a weird quirk in the system, you can apply more than 3 months in advance of you getting the free childcare. So you could be in an awkward situation where you've applied, you've been given a reference number, then you come to use that reference number to apply your free hours, and you'll find your code has expired.
And you're going to have to do it all again.
And you have to do it all again. I mean, it's easy enough to do again, but you'll end up doing it twice. So just be aware of that.
And there's the other thing that I kind of alluded to at the beginning of the podcast. It's about how this free childcare will actually be applied in the real world. So you've secured your free childcare that you get. I mean, people are already receiving it for children who are 3 and 4, but one of the experiences they will have, which we are aware of and we're sharing with people who listen to the podcast, is that when you come to actually use that, you can't just assume you're going to get 15 hours, there's my 15 hours, I don't have to pay anything, or just 15 hours knocked off the bill, can you?
No, it really depends on the childcare setting. They'll all have different rules. So you'll need to make sure that you check what those rules are. Most childcare settings provide what they call sessions. And so you may find, this is an example, that they run 2 sessions, a morning and an afternoon session, and they're usually maybe 3 hours in total. So you'll get a 9 till 12 session, then there'll be a lunch period, and then maybe the afternoon session would start from 1 till 4. But of course, if you're a working parent and you drop your child off, say, before 9 o'clock, and you pick them up, say, after 5 o'clock, there'll be 3 periods there where you'll have to foot the bill. The bit before the session starts, the bit in the middle of the session, the bit at the end of the session. And then, of course, you might have to pay for lunches. You might have to pay for additional extracurricular things like maybe French or art or things that aren't covered by the free childcare. And of course, there might be additional trips to pay for. So even though your child is maybe going to that childcare setting for 2 or 3 days a week, you still might not be able to claim the full 15 or 30 hours.
Yeah, so you may, for example, decide that you're going to be working Monday and Tuesday, and you think, well, the 15 hours will cover all of that. Because it's done in sessions, it could be that actually so many hours, if each session is, say, 3 hours, and you're able to just pay for those sessions, then that means in those 2 days, you've actually only used 12 hours. And of course, you may have other bits to pay on top. So we're just pointing it out because this is the reality. Andy and I have experienced this in the real world when we're going back to when our children were younger. And it's not a criticism of the system. It is something that is just the way it works. And part of that is because the settings don't get paid the best rate by the government. And also it is a frustration of parents. So we can see both sides, but just giving you the reality of the situation. There are 15 hours of free childcare available for 2-year-olds that have come in now. So it's something for people to look into, but you've got to also be realistic and understand how this works in the real world.
Yeah, and just before we finish on this, while we're talking about free childcare, don't forget, of course, that there is a government scheme which is called the Taxfree childcare scheme, which overtook what used to be called childcare vouchers. It essentially means that if you earn under £100,000, you can access tax-free childcare. The way that it works is you log onto the government site and you pay money in via your card or via a standing order. Annoyingly, they don't allow you to do direct debit yet. And you top up however much you need to pay towards your childcare, and the government will add their bit. And so the way that it works is for every £8 you pay in, the government will pay in an additional £2 to top it up to a maximum of £2,000 from their side. Just be aware though that it is capped at £500 per quarter. So you couldn't put, say, all of your money in the first couple of months of the year expecting to get the full £2,000. It is capped at £500 per quarter. Just one of those quirks.
So the cap applies to what the government is going to actually add to the pot. So that makes sense. So that's a brilliant roundup, I think. We put links as usual in the notes of the podcast. Right, moving on to the last piece of the podcast, Andy. And I came across this on social media, and it's a trend that has started on TikTok, I think, originally, but it has spread to other social platforms. But it's the concept of loud budgeting. And I found out a bit more about it, and I do quite like it, but it's something that I think that people can apply. They don't have to apply it on social media, but it's the idea of taking control. So going back one step to budgeting. Now, we've done podcasts on this. We provide a budgeting spreadsheet that people can use and download. But the thing that I've always said to people, that try and think of it as a spending plan rather than a budget. So you're not using that sort of negative framework to think about it, but it's actually you choosing how you want to spend your money. It's something that's proactive and positive, and it's a great way of making you more likely to stick to it. But also it's all about being deliberate about what you want from your money. Now, this idea of loud budgeting is something I think that began at the beginning of 2024, and social media is awash with people showing off about what they have, or in some cases actually pretending they've got things. I've seen some really funny things where people are posing on top of other people's cars, claiming that they're their own cars and all this kind of stuff, and it can actually make people feel under pressure to keep up with the Joneses and overspend. Now, the idea of loud budgeting came about where people were thinking about being more authentic and having boundaries when it came to their money. So rather than if you were going to go out with, say, friends, think of it like you were taken to an expensive restaurant and you're sitting there thinking, I don't know how I'm going to afford this, and then you're going to be fretting for the rest of the month, probably having to cut back on other things, because we've done that very British thing often where we don't say what we are thinking, and you don't want to feel embarrassed about talking about money. The idea behind loud budgeting is you are much more deliberate and open with people, and it's not about you saying I can't afford to do this, so I can't afford to eat in this restaurant. It may be you saying I don't want to do that, and you'd rather do something else, because it could be that you want to be saving towards something, and what you do is you share that idea. So you say to people that I don't want to do that, I want to do this because I am maybe saving for a house on a deposit. So you are being very deliberate about what you're wanting to spend your money on. You're communicating it with people. And in a weird way, it also gives an element of accountability to what you're doing with your money. And it helps you to stick to any budgets. And you don't have that FOMO thing because you're actually taking control of a situation. And I quite like it because it's something that is new, because it's come from social media, and it's particularly a younger generation that have come up with the concept. And I think it's something that resonates with lots of the stuff that we talk about on the podcast, about how you deal with money, how you budget. And if used correctly, it could help you do things like clear debt or save for a house deposit. So the idea of loud budgeting, I'm not saying go out there and tell the world about what you're going to do, but what I think the takeaway from it, which I like, is being much more deliberate and vocal about money. You don't have to talk about how much you earn and all these kind of things, because I think a lot of people aren't yet prepared for that frankness of conversation around money. But you can be frank, and I think it's great to say to somebody, do you know what, I don't want to go out for that particular restaurant. Can we go here? Because that's what I want to do and spend my money on, because I'd rather spend my money on X or something else.
What I quite like about that is there's quite a lot of positives there. Specifically, discussing that problem, if you like, with that friend might then mean going forward that you actually do end up at least doing something. Whereas before, you might come up with an excuse or a reason to completely miss out because you don't want to share why you're not doing these things. Now you're coming up with a solution, which is, yeah, I do still want to come out, but it might be a different style of going out. So that person is suddenly going out more, but still achieving their goals.
Yeah, and I remember you and I talking about this on the podcast before, where you'd rather go out and do a number of nights out that are cheaper than one big blowout that you're going to some expensive meal. And it's kind of the same thing, but given a label, a hashtag of loud budgeting, where you're deciding very deliberately what you want to do. And I like it. I think people should take the idea and think about it sometimes, where they may have relationships with people, or they may feel sometimes that things are awkward because they don't really want to go out because they're going to spend a load of money. money. Don't be the passenger, take control and actually say to people what it is you want to do, set those boundaries. And it doesn't have to be a negative thing. I actually think it's a very positive thing. And I think most people probably appreciate a bit of honesty anyway. So if somebody said to you, do you know what? Let's just go out for drinks. I don't really want to go out for dinner because I'm saving my money for X, or I've got a bill I've got to pay this month. Whatever it may be, I think most people would just appreciate that and go, yeah, great, okay, let's just go for drinks. And then you move things forward in a very positive manner. So I like the idea of loud budgeting. If any of you ever done something similar, had any stories where you found that it's worked for you, then do write in and share them. So Andy, that is it for this week on the podcast. We'll be back next week as usual. Don't forget that the most important thing you've got to do today is go and review the Money to Masses podcast and give us 5 stars, and then tell the whole world about it and write in, and you could potentially win a Money to the Masses mug. Don't forget to follow us on all our social channels, particularly Instagram and of course YouTube. There's always lots of new content going on there. There were a lot of you from last week's show where we highlighted a video that we created on the best stocks and shares ISA that did go on and subscribe to the channel. So we thank you for doing that. And going forward, we will be producing a lot more content on our YouTube channel.
And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the Money to the Masses newsletter. Go to moneytothemasses.com/newsletter for that. You'll get our latest newsletter sent to you at 10 a.m. every Sunday morning. And of course, you can go to our Facebook community group. It is facebook.com/groups/Money to the Masses. And you can ask questions and speak to like-minded people over there. So that's it. We are done for this week, Damien. Until next time.
Until next time.